Friends, let's go ahead and get started. Those in the back with what's left of lunch, please feel free to take it to the tables, and we'll get started with our roundtable. This is the first public event of the new Center for the Study of New Media and Society at the New Economic School. It's a new academic and public policy research center that we have launched just like this summer to try to address from a multidisciplinary and a global perspective some of the salient issues that actually have been talked about this morning and yesterday here at the Media Economics workshop, as well as more broadly the social, economic, and political ways in which the internet, new media, social media, and new communications technologies are changing the way people work, interact, socialize, engage, and develop generally in Russia and around the world. A large part of our mission, alongside doing useful and rigorous research, is to help integrate the conversation that's happening here in Russia with global discourses on new media, the internet, and ICT. And so I'm extremely happy today to be able to present as our first event here this roundtable with a thoroughly global perspective. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers today, starting from the far end, Bruce ETLING and Rob FARIS from the Berkman Center for Internet Society at Harvard University Law School. Many of you may be familiar with the study of the Russian blogosphere that they published recently, and that has been, to date, the gold standard, I think, in the study of the development of the Russian internet. Pedro, MIZUKAMI, senior researcher at the Center for the Study of Technology and Society at FGV in Brazil. Sunil, director of the Center for Internet and Society in Bangalore. Marina. We invite you to the dais, Marina ZHUNICH, director of Government Relations and Outreach at Google Russia. This is not so much a research panel as a public policy panel, and not so much an academic panel as a roundtable. So we're going to go fairly quickly through what I've invited the panelists to do, which is to present what is, from their perspective, the most exciting and salient issues that they're dealing with today. I think that we'll have a broad range of issues, ranging from the impact of the internet on political communities and the development of citizen-state relations, through to broader regulatory issues involving privacy, intellectual property, access to knowledge, and freedom of expression. And then we'll open it up for debate and conversation with everybody gathered here in the room. So with that, I will hand it over to Bruce. Start off.
Yeah. Hi everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I feel there's a lot of pressure right now, given that you've chosen to listen to us instead of having the full lunch. So I hope it's a good choice on your part, I promise. So at the Berkman Center, we've been around for 13 years. We started out studying cyber law and technology. We've grown to be a multidisciplinary center in that time, and take on a lot of different issues, anywhere from cyber law to intellectual property to youth and media, to the impact of new media on politics, which is what I'm going to talk about, in a sense introducing the work that Bruce will show you as well. The study of the internet, of course, doesn't fall neatly within a discipline, and one of the things that we are currently working on, and will probably continue to work on for the next couple of decades, is trying to figure out how to put together hypotheses, research questions with methodologies and data, and the tools the other way is to try to study the internet as an entity and see what kind of tools can be put on that. One of the issues, of course, is data, and in many ways the data that we use to study the internet is kind of lying around for us to go find. It's wonderful in that there's a lot of data, a lot of communication and human thought is sitting out there waiting for us to cultivate it, collect it. The problem, of course, is it's not structured well to be able to draw inferences from the data and be able to. So that's, again, kind of in way of reducing your expectations about this. So what I want to do is I want to float out a theory of how new media changes politics. And I'm going to give you 4 mechanisms by which new media and digital technologies influence politics. And Bruce is going to show you empirical evidence from one of those things. So the first thing I want to throw out for your consideration is the impact on transparency and accountability. The standard kind of picture we have in our minds is somebody with a cell phone who documents incidents of police abuse, but somehow this would then presumably lead to greater accountability within police forces if nothing happens. I would throw WikiLeaks in that category. So number 1 is transparency and accountability. The second one drives from the work of Yochai Benkler and others, which is the emergence of what we call the networked public sphere. This is the creation of really a new institution, a new Habermasian space online where people debate and deliberate different ideas, and in the best, most optimistic of terms, the better ideas float to the top, and we've created a new media ecosystem that is more participatory and has fewer gatekeepers associated with it. I think all these points are certainly debatable, but that's number 2 is the network public sphere. The last 2 I want to throw out there are very closely related, but I think it's worth making a distinction between the 2 of them. So one of them is to reduce transaction costs in both sharing information online, but also in organizing it. So Facebook could be a good example of this, blogging platforms, but this has 2 prongs, both informational and organizational. So we've got transparency and accountability, network public sphere, reduced transaction costs. The 4th one is a term I'm going to steal from Henry Farrell at George Washington University, which is preference revelation. The idea being it's easier for me to go online and tell all of you what issues are of great importance to me, as well as to see which issues are all important to you. And this combination gives us the possibility to aggregate these preferences in a way that wasn't, I don't want to say it was impossible before, but it should be presumably easier than it was in the past. So now I'm going to cherry pick an example to walk through this. I'll choose Egypt, noting that this is an exceptional case. So in Egypt, you have the cell phone that documents police abuse. This leads to greater outrage at the injustice and the social injustice going on. We have the emergence of a very dynamic blogosphere, which Bruce will describe in a minute. But in looking at the blogosphere in Egypt, we see the seeds of the revolution occurring many, many years ago, and that the major figures, the leaders in the protest movements in Cairo, all had a long and abiding presence in the blogosphere, where they were trotting out ideas, debating with one another. So the April 6 people, the Kafaya people, the leftists, the Muslim Brotherhood, all had a presence in the blogosphere for many, many years. So that's the network public sphere. Preference revelation. I would give the example of the We Are Colleagues site Facebook page. This was set up, and I'm sure you probably all know the example by now, but many, many people joined this, and according to this theory, this made more visible the outrage and the opposition to the standing regime that was there. And then the other piece is reduced transaction costs in organizing and sharing information, which I think is obvious. So I think it holds together fairly well for Egypt. I want to now give a critique of this very same framework. Not necessarily the framework, but to say why new media may not have a positive influence on politics, given these factors that I talked about. So transparency and accountability, as we've heard in some of the other presentations earlier, the fact that you have more information and new voices doesn't necessarily mean that people are better informed. It doesn't even necessarily mean that things are more transparent. Transparency has many layers. Taking pictures of blatant abuse is an easy example, but when we deal with more complex issues of public policy, for example, debating the merits of the United States healthcare program, it's unclear that the existence of the blogosphere is making the pros and cons of this more transparent and leading to a more informed electorate. Similarly, the network public sphere, we hope that it's converging towards its idealized form where the best ideas are floating to the top, where there is true debate and deliberation. I think that's still a hypothesis at this point. The reduced transaction cost of organizing. So I think in some cases that is true, but we also have to remember that for a lot of political engagement and political participation, the internet hasn't changed the cost of participating at all. The Occupy Wall Street movement, the cost of camping out in New York City for 2 weeks haven't changed at all due to the internet. Perhaps the motivation to go there and find other people to do that. So anyway, there's a framework for you to consider. I know it's kind of a risky move offering a framework such as this to a crowd of media scholars, but I'm sure I'll hear about it in a minute. So what I want to do is turn it over to Bruce at this point, who is going to describe our work in studying blogospheres, which we see as a proxy, or at least a part of the network sphere, in using 4 different languages. Is that good, Bruce?
Quite yet.
Does anybody want to sneak in a question while we get moved up here?
I wonder if you distinguish between like developing countries or developed democracies in the world blogosphere.
Well, certainly all the impact of any one of these things will be context dependent. So I chose Egypt as the example, and so the impact of the blogosphere, I don't think anywhere in the world will you have an impact as large in the blogosphere as you had in Egypt, because you had this unusual confluence of events in a fairly open internet. It's not without restrictions, but compared to other places in the world, it had similar levels of repression of traditional media, large media outlets. The internet is comparison quite open. Also in other places, Libya, for example, the internet has been suppressed sufficiently so that the role of the internet in the Libyan revolution is minor, if at all. So context is everything.
Thank you, Rob. So Rob laid a good foundation for sort of the theoretical piece, and now I wanted to show some of the data collection we've done and some of the efforts we've made. We're not the first ones to do this, but we are trying to improve our methods every time. I will say that in terms of internet research, early on it was, and this is a bad thing I think, really dominated by what was happening in the US or English language internet, as well as more advanced countries in that now. What we've tried to do is to, sort of starting with that knowledge about the English blogosphere and what some other scholars did early on, as in particular Adam and Clance looked at the 2004 US presidential election and political bloggers and what they said and how they acted. And we find that structure actually has been the same throughout the years, and we'll show a little bit of that later. But what we've tried to do is to do a multi-method approach, which looks at foreign language blogospheres. So we often get to some of the big countries that we care about, and we are in particular interested in looking at sort of political and social mobilization. What are the communities that exist in this space? And then we go ahead and we study what sort of issues they care about and how they're talking about different issues. So the first one that we have, first one we did is the Persian language blogosphere. And again, it's easier, as I said, it's easier to divide these networks online by their language use, because a computer can tell very easily between Persian language and English or Russian or whatnot. But this one is actually dominated almost entirely by Iran. There is a small group that is actually before I get to that, let me sort of explain how we draw these maps. Okay, so the first thing is each dot is a social network map. This sort of methodology is very popular in sociology, although political scientists and it actually started in sort of physics and other things like that. So this is all computer generated, this part. Each dot is a blog. The size of the dot is based on the number of links to it. So this is all primarily based on hyperlinks and how bloggers link to each other and the types of things they link out to. So you'll see that there are different clusters. So you can imagine that there's a force pushing every dot off the map, and then they're drawn together in different communities in these different clusters based on similar static blog role links. So in particular shared links. So if everybody on the panel, all 5 or 6 of us, had a blog, and we all are talking about similar issues and linking to the same people, we'll link together because we have like 80–90% of our links are the same into these position clusters. The next thing we do is we add color to it. And color is based on outlinks, things that bloggers in their active posts, when they link to something outside, for example, it's typically things like newspapers, but also other bloggers, if they're major bloggers typically. And that adds color to the blogs. And then the next step is we do a number of different types of content analysis. So we do automatic frequency term analysis. So what are the terms that occur most frequently in that yellow cluster relative to the others? And the final step is we have humans, native speakers, read a sample usually between 1,000 and 4,000. So this is actually about 6,000. The maps tend to have about 8,000 to 10,000 of the most popular blogs based on links. And we will do a sample of about 1,000 to 4,000. Have humans read a common code sheet and tell us things that computers can't tell us. So are they male or female? Can you tell how old they are roughly? What issues are they talking about? And really, often the most sort of interesting qualitative assessments are just tell us, like in a paragraph, what is unique about this blogger. Then researchers take all that data, combine it together, layer it on top of each other, and we do what is the most difficult and the least precise process, is we add a label to each of these clusters. So this is Iran. What was most interesting here is that in the US at least, it was sort of a popular meme in the press about all these bloggers in Iran, this was done 3 or 4 years ago, are very young, they're liberal, and they're all opposed to the regime. And what we actually found when we did this is that, well, yes, there's a small group of them, but that's only one little part of the blogosphere, and actually there's a much larger space. So what we call secular expatriate and reformist politics, with Hatami as one of the key nodes in there, is an example of that group. And so they're actually it's a split between about half are outside the country. So many of these were journalists that were forced to leave due to repression within the country, and they've gone to the US and the UK and other places. But they're still writing in Persian. They're still involved in talking about politics there. They're very engaged with folks within the country that are also being critical of the government and we call that reformist politics. That's the group there. But we also found that there's actually a large group of people that are actually in the government as well as government supporters, what we call conservative politics. They're actually involved as well. Also lots of religion. Mixed networks is sort of a loose group of people talking about popular culture, so football, things like that. Most unexpected for us, but not surprising if you're an Iran expert, a huge poetry cluster. So what we're seeing in sort of like theory is that, well, actually these are not reflections of just the online community, but they're reflections of the offline space. And so it's interesting if we go forward to think about how much are these similar and the same. So here's the English language blogosphere that we talked about. These are dominated, again, it's dominated by the United States, which has a very large political blogosphere. Let me get out of the way so folks over here can see. Really dominated by, and a reflection, I think, of the stable two-party system in the United States, and we have the liberals and the conservatives, so this is primarily Republicans and Democrats. Just an example, this is the kind of structure we see, though, in almost every country where there's a political space that's being hotly debated within the online space, that they're next to each other on the map. They're talking about the same types of things, politics, but they're talking about it from different perspectives. And this one also shows, I don't have it labeled here, but at the top there's a bit of a smaller UK-based blogosphere. There's also parenting bloggers are very active in the US. And then something that's unique about the United States, there's a very large technology cluster of bloggers, as well as a lot of actual law professors that are online and writing about law. So again, it's just a reflection, not necessarily of always the politics, but of the people that are the first movers in.
Bruce, could you also repeat once again what the color means?
So the color is what we call an attentive cluster. It's based on the outlinks, so the things that they're paying attention to. So when they link so imagine you have a blog. Within the blog post, you can create a hyperlink, and that's what we're measuring. We're measuring what are the types of links that are going out from each of those popular blogs. And again, as I mentioned, with politics, the first thing you can almost always find is that they're looking at the top national news sites and newspapers, and also linking to like top political bloggers. But for example, for a poetry cluster, there are things like, well-known, at least in Iran, Web 1.0 sort of static websites, but that have, are based on something around a society of artists or poets or whatnot. So those are the sort of hints that we look for. So Rob mentioned the Arabic blogosphere. We did this before the Arab Spring happened, so this map is a couple years old. We're saying that this is actually, these maps are drawn over the space of, so it's got all the data from a year. And so they will change only a little bit year over year. And we found actually that even with Iran, even after between sort of the quote-unquote Green Revolution happened, or Green protests, that before and after, actually the space did not change that much. And really, while the number of blogs that are continually posting will sort of drop and rise over time, and maybe only 20% of the same blogs will be on the map, that the structure actually stays very similar. So as Rob mentioned, probably Egypt is very interesting. It's huge, even though there's only like 15% internet penetration. They absolutely dominate the space. They take up roughly that top quarter there. It took us a couple sort of runs through the system to make sure that we weren't capturing only the Egyptian blogosphere, because it's such a large part of the Arab blogosphere. As you mentioned, so at the bottom, you have sort of the Muslim Brotherhood. Above them is more just religious bloggers, not talking about politics, but just talking about religion. That white is a lot of, like, we call it Egyptian youth. So it's lots of young people. It actually had more women in it than almost any other cluster in the section, in this map. And then the sort of secular reformist, which is not a great title perhaps, but this included Kafaya, the April 6th movement, anti-torture bloggers, and sort of a lot of these communities that were part of the Arab Spring. Just one other interesting point on this one, Saudi Arabia, so again, another thought is, is this a direct reflection of political realities on the ground? There's another theory that says, as you push down on pressure on the offline world, do those groups that are oppressed offline actually pop up and appear in this space? And a good example of that happening is actually in Saudi Arabia, where you would not expect to find it, but we found more female bloggers, except for that Egyptian youth cluster they talked about, more female bloggers in that part than any other part of the map. So here's the Russian blogosphere. This is online. You can see a lot of detail about it, but as you can tell, it's much more mixed up than you would expect, and that's really interesting just in terms of a network structure compared to, so you can see there's very clear clusters are sort of often. What we see here is that they're actually much more mixed up together. The thing that's really unique about it is it's dominated by almost one platform, which is LiveJournal. Something like 90% of the most popular blogs in Russia are on LiveJournal. We see sort of three big groupings. One is politics and public affairs. One is what we call instrumental. That's really people, it's more sort of social media marketing, people trying to sell things, people trying to make money using their blogs, as opposed to blogging about their sort of own personal interests. Cultural, as you'd expect to find, lots of literature, blogs, things talking about contemporary culture and music. There's a question here.
Yeah, I was wondering if in the public affairs and politics sphere you find any dichotomy between like pro-government and opposition or something.
It's a great point. We did not find any, and this is similar to Egypt, we did not find any pro-government cluster in the Russian blogosphere.
It's all pro-government?
We don't know why. No, that's because we have, so the mix is, it's actually, most bloggers that are talking about politics in Russia, based on our analysis, are talking about it from a sort of non-aligned perspective. So they're really focused on news and they're talking about news events, but they aren't saying like, putting a flag in the ground like a US blogger. I'm a Republican and this is what I think about this issue from the Republican perspective. They're not really closely aligned with any sort of party in that sense. And they're also not closely aligned with the Democratic opposition parties. So there is a small Democratic opposition cluster, but most of them are focused on what we call the business and economic news, on international news because they're linking out to things like the New York Times and English language sources. And the biggest is the Russian news cluster, which is looking at Russian language sources and talking about local news from that perspective. One thing we didn't expect to find was, and I'm running out of time, so I'll just run ahead to Twitter, is this nationalist cluster, a very large cluster of nationalists. Alicia?
You said that in Russian blogosphere you found out that you have to use a different notion of
Yes, it could be. That's a possibility. And so what happened with the LiveJournal platform is that it is not simply a blogging platform like WordPress or something. It's actually a combination of a blogging platform and a social network. So what happens if you just do the study as we did with the old methodology, that you would actually end up just having these extreme polar pockets of bloggers, and there's no actual connections between them, because it's like, imagine like if you drew a Facebook network, it'd just be a bunch of atomized group of friends, and they clustered up around something like where they went to school or Moscow, like at big cities and stuff. So it is possible that part of that is reflected in. So what we did to draw the Russian maps is we only use active links, and so we remove those friends lists, which are forcing them into those tight clusters. So that is a possibility that that reflects some of the structure.
In no other blogosphere there are friend links?
Not in the same way that LiveJournal does it. And so this is the final step. I'll just cover very quickly. This is a first tentative look at, we're trying to now look at Russian, at Twitter. And so the first map we're trying this with is Russian language. And so, again, similar structure. This is a mentions map that we can talk about more later, how we drew it. But we find a lot of similarities, such as lots of sort of international former Soviet Union type of links. So Ukraine and Belarus, Ukraine is a lot of, it's mostly Russia, but Ukraine is also there. Also some small clusters, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. A large technology cluster, some of that instrumental sort of social media marketing stuff that we talked about before, and then the final slide. There is politics here, interesting point that actually we do find sympathizers of the government or pro-government elements actually on Twitter, and we did not find that, as we said, in the blogosphere. The Democratic cluster is there, and then it's zero time. So we can talk more about that at the end, but thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Pedro, please. Your file is also on the computer.
So hello everyone. Before I start to talk about our topic, which is internet regulation in Brazil, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes telling you about where I'm from and what we do. I'm from the Center for Technology and Society at FGV Law School in Rio de Janeiro. FGV stands for Getúlio Vargas Foundation. This is our main building. You can't see it in the picture, but right in front of the ugly building there's a beautiful beach. We're looking at a Botafogo beach in Rio de Janeiro. FGV is a big institution. Sometimes we're international events and we say we're from FGV. FGV is actually a big institution with over 60 years of history, and we're only part of the Rio de Janeiro Law School, which actually is much younger. It was founded in 2003. Our center was also founded in 2003. So we are a small part of the Rio de Janeiro Law School, which is a small part of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. So this is CTS. You can see on the bottom row in the strategically cropped picture, and you probably may have crossed paths with one of our crew and probably not even noticed it, but we're everywhere in the world where there is an intellectual property or internet governance event or seminar, and we're even in media economics seminar, despite the fact that we're not economists, we're all lawyers. But we're not lawyers who practice law. When I say we're lawyers, I mean that we have a legal background. We're lawyers who do research. Most of it is on intellectual property with a strong focus on copyright. But we also do research on internet governance, privacy, media policy, and we've been branching off lately. Been doing research about video games and the fashion industry of Rio de Janeiro. But I'm not here to talk about research. I'm here to talk about an experiment in policy making. And this is where I begin to talk about problems related to internet governance in Brazil and internet regulation. We have two major problems right now. The first of which is we have huge gaps in legislation. Brazilian law is certainly not able to deal with the impacts that were brought upon by new technologies. There has been no specific law related to the internet that can provide a guideline for judges to decide in a coherent manner. And this has given room to several decisions that are sometimes contradictory and sometimes very absurd. And the other problem is that the attempts that we had in filling these gaps were all done through criminal law. And we have several bills dealing with internet regulation in Brazil, and most of them, the vast majority, are criminal law bills. And I'd like to bring up two examples. One is just an illustration of the first problem, and the second one is actually the problem itself. The Daniela Ciccarelli case is one of the most famous cases related to the internet in Brazil and internet liability. Daniela Ciccarelli is a famous Brazilian model, and as the story goes, she was with her boyfriend on a beach, on a public beach in Spain, and she decided it was a good idea to have sex on the beach. And this was, of course, captured on tape by paparazzo, and it ended up on YouTube. So it ended up on YouTube not only one time, but several times. And she was understandably upset, and she asked the videos to be taken down, and the videos were taken down. But for each video that was removed from YouTube, 5 or 6 more appeared. So what she eventually asked, and what the judge complied with, was that YouTube should be taken off the air in Brazil. So we had a legal decision that took YouTube off the Brazilian internet for 2 days or so. This decision was later reformed, but it points out to a serious problem we have. WordPress had the same problem in 2008, only it did not, it didn't end up being taken off the air. Another solution was reached, but this is only a single case that's very representative of this problem we have. The judges are basically not prepared or do not have the orientation from Brazilian legislation to deal with these problems. So the second example I want to bring to you is the main criminal law bill that we have in Brazil right now that tries to deal with these issues. I mean, there's a long tradition in Brazil to solve problems through the creation of crimes and through criminal measures, and this is a good example of the internet cybercrime bill spree we had. This is Senator Eduardo Azevedo, who took over this bill. It was actually not his proposition. He took over this bill around 2003, and this is actually several bills that were amended and fused into one. And this is the major Brazilian cybercrime bill currently. And he's backed by banks, basically, and the federal police of Brazil. So what are the problems with this bill? This establishes extremely broad crimes, some of which have unintended consequences, most of them related to copyright. I mean, one specific crime in this bill is designed to punish breaches in security, I mean, invasions of remote computers. But it actually turns out that it criminalizes breaking technological protection measures. This is unintended to a degree because the content industries are also backing this bill, not as explicitly as the banks or the federal police. This bill also establishes 3 years for data retention, which we think is excessive. And it is also very generous in granting investigative powers to police authorities. These are only a few problems of this bill. And this has generated a very strong public backlash. You can see here 3 people. This is a manifestation in front of the National Congress. These are only 3 people, but they're actually representing a movement of thousands of Brazilians that are campaigning against this specific bill. And these are very media-savvy people, and they make a lot of noise. So this has been a pet topic of Brazilian press for a while, the Azevedo criminal cybercrime bill. And this has eventually reached President Lula. This is President Lula talking at the Free Software Forum in 2010. And one of the slogans that the campaigners were pushing forward was that we should have a general law, a general framework dealing with internet law that draws from civil law as opposed to criminal law, and that we should have thus a marco civil for the internet, which is roughly translated a civil law-based framework for the internet. So this idea of the marco civil caught on, and the President, through the Ministry of Justice, decided that it was time to try a public consultation on what would be the ideal internet law framework for Brazil. So this is what a public audience generally looks like in Brazil. It's very static. You need to be in Brasilia at the National Congress, and you need to be in Brasilia if you're campaigning for a particular bill or for a particular cause. You need to be in Brasilia several times a year, and Brasilia is actually in the middle of Brazil and probably in the middle of nowhere, and it's equally far away from everywhere else in the country. And it takes a lot of money to be in Brasilia, and this type of this mode of public participation in the lawmaking process usually involves you having to talk to senators and deputies, to be invited to speak on a public hearing, or to be there to be able to make questions. So this is a very, very static, a very, very traditional mode of public consultation in Brazil, and this is basically does not reach the public at all. It reaches a few people that are actually able to lobby and to actually know Brasilia well. So since we were talking about coming up with a framework for internet law, we decided to use the internet to produce this law. So this is sort of an experiment in user-generated law, or a citizen-generated law, if you will. And this is the logo we had for the Marco Civil process. And I would like to go briefly over how this was set up. We acted as consultants to the Ministry of Justice, which has a department that is responsible for drafting all of the projects, of all of the bills that are proposed by government in Congress. So we worked with this office in supervising this two-stage process that took, we started in 2009 and finished in 2010. And it took two stages of 45 days each. This is the main website we had for the consultation. It's a very simple WordPress site. We make full use of plugins, but it's very simple, anyone can set this up. And the first stage of the consultation was about general principles. So we came up with a text that framed the questions that we thought were more urgent and were more directly related to the problems we had. You can't read that, but there are several topics, some of which are data retention and how to guarantee privacy, net neutrality, freedom of expression. So these were short texts on each of these subjects that generally framed the issue and gave pointers to possible policy solutions. So we received comments for 45 days on this text so that we had an idea of what the people who were part of this consultation actually thought was the ideal approach to a general framework for the internet in Brazil. So the second stage of the consultation involved the direct commentary over a specific text that we drafted along with the Ministry of Justice based on the comments we had received on the first stage of the consultation. So the first comments we received kind of set up the boundaries within which we had the freedom to propose a few specific policy recommendations in the format of a draft bill. So this was set up so that people could comment on an article-by-article basis. And as a result, over the two periods of consultation, we had over 8,000 contributions from citizens, NGOs, and corporations. And this is not only, these are not only the contributions that we received through the website itself. We also actively monitor Twitter, the blogosphere, and traditional media to harvest comments on the consultation so that we could have a clear picture of what people were saying about it. So I have over 700 pages of commentary, and these are only the commentary, the comments that were posted on the website. And this is all available for anyone who's interested in perusing it, and it gives a clear picture of what was discussed and what the conversation was during the consultation. And as another result, this model of public consultation has been adopted in 3 other public consultations processes in Brazil. These have wrapped, except for the last one. We had a consultation on copyright reform, on data protection, and the new civil procedure code, and these all use the same method. As a result, we have a bill that was introduced in Congress this September, It has a less charming name. It's not Marco Civil anymore. It's Bill 2126 from 2011. And I'd like to go over a few of the main points of this bill with you. So it's a very general, very concise bill. It's very simple to read, very simple to understand, easy to understand. It has only 25 articles, which for Brazil are very few. It provides orientation for future legislation, and it begins with a clear message for legislators. It establishes that the recognition of the international nature of the Internet is one of the principles for Internet regulation. So this is sort of a message on the limits to law enforcement on an online environment. And it also establishes that the law shall be construed taking into account not only the principles, objectives, and directives established herein, but also the nature of the Internet, its particular uses and customs, and its role in the promotion of human, economic, social, and cultural development. So this is another message. And what the law tries to do is to protect the general architecture of the Internet, to preserve this architecture because it pictures this architecture as an useful tool for the promotion of human, economic, social, and cultural development. So based on that, we have three chapters dealing with users, online intermediaries, and government. And the users section is based on user rights. It's sort of a bill of rights for Internet users. So among the rights that we assert, as access to the Internet is to be considered a right of Brazilian citizens. And we have successfully inserted an anti-free strikes provision in there. It establishes that there's supposed to be no suspension of Internet connections except for that directly related to the use of the connection. So there's no way that a free strike system could be established through a law. We strongly assert freedom of expression, and here we have an issue because the Brazilian Constitution actually prohibits anonymous expression, and anonymous expression was a big part of the consultation. So what the Brazilian Constitution does not say is that anonymous access is forbidden. So we sort of had a workaround with regards to the prohibition to anonymous expression with safeguarding anonymous access, privacy, and privacy-enabling technologies. So it's a right for Brazilian citizens to make use of technologies such as Tor or encryption or web proxies or whatever to preserve their privacy. On online intermediaries, one of the versions of the text, the first version of the text that was put into consultation had a notice and takedown system that was roughly based on the American DMCA. This proved out to be very, very controversial, and we had to remove it during the consultation because there was a huge, huge public outcry depicting this as censorship. Requests for the removal of content now depend on judicial orders. We have data limitation for 1 year. This was the result of some bargaining because the federal police is also part of the Ministry of Justice. This is still open. It could change during the legislative process. And we have a net neutrality provision. And finally, I'll just go over briefly over these. We have a series of government directives that deal with open data, the use of free software and open standards, and promoting digital inclusion. So this is a rough overview of what this bill tries to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try and cover some more detail when it comes to the emerging discussions around intellectual property. To begin with, I will look at exceptions for the disabled, particularly the blind. If you are a blind student in the US and the publisher does not make an accessible version of the book available to you, then under US copyright law, you are entitled to convert the book into an accessible format and also make it available to other blind persons such as yourself. If you were a blind student in India and you tried to do that, most probably you'll be sent to jail for 6 months. Fortunately, at the World Intellectual Property Organization, the lobbying of associations representing the blind has finally made a difference. WIPO is currently discussing a treaty for the visually impaired. Unfortunately, it is both disability specific and also birth specific. That means it only applies to those persons who are visually impaired, and it only applies to books. The Center for Internet and Society, the ZHUNICH Act in Bangalore, has been lobbying the Indian government, along with a variety of other disability groups in India. And in the current proposed copyright amendment to the Indian Copyright Act, we have much better exception. It's both disability neutral and birth neutral. So this is one big push across the globe to ensure that the disabled have access to knowledge. The second point I'd like to make is about cultural flat rates and copyright levies. The fastest internet that I've ever experienced personally was not in the Netherlands or in some other first world countries that you might suspect, but actually in Tajikistan, where I had gone to work on an e-governance project. The local ISP hosts on its local servers complete copies of Hollywood films and Russian films and also Bollywood films from India. I tried to download a 2.5 gigabyte film and it took about 8 minutes. This of course is a violation of Tajik copyright law and also international copyright treaties, but there is a possible route through which this could be legitimized. And this is the proposal that's currently being discussed in Germany. There are different ways people refer to it. They call it a cultural flat rate or a copyright levy. So when you pay your broadband bill, you pay an additional 2 or 5% on that bill, which is then collected by a copyright collecting society. Then this collecting society uses chart data from the legal markets and also data from the BitTorrent networks. There are companies like Big Champagne that consolidate this data, and then the revenues from the cultural flat rate or copyright levy is distributed amongst the rights holders. So that's an emerging proposal, very seriously discussed in many countries, where it is difficult to enforce or fully implement copyright. The last story is about patent pools and royalty caps, and it's a story between India and China. I'm holding in my hand a mobile phone which is called the Spice Popcorn M9000. It's very similar to my BlackBerry. My BlackBerry costs $300. It's a cheaper BlackBerry. It's not a very expensive one. The Spice Popcorn M9000 costs $120. I will now go through the list of features that exist on the Spice Popcorn M9000 that don't exist on the BlackBerry. The first feature is the dual SIM card. It supports 2 SIM cards. It's very important in countries where telecom regulation hasn't been gotten right, especially in Africa and Asia, where you need 2 SIM cards and that's how you save. The second feature is a receiver for FM radio. And the third feature is a receiver for terrestrial television. The fourth feature is boombox style speakers that can fill a room with music. The next feature is the Pica projector, which you can watch television on it, and it ships with external. You can see it's not dark enough for you to see it. It ships with external speakers. It ships with a tripod stand, which is useful when you're watching the videos. And it ships with the laser pointer and torch. The way this works is there is no, even though it's sold in India and under an Indian brand, it doesn't mean Indians are responsible for this innovation. All the Indian entrepreneur has to do is to go to Shenzhen, and there are factories that produce these phones. These factories will give the Indian entrepreneur a menu card of features. Do you want the camera on the front? Do you want the camera on the side? Do you want Android or do you not want Android, etc., etc. So the Indian entrepreneur only has to tick against the features that he requires on the phone and then provide a JPEG or GIF version of the logo. And within 45 days, for a minimum order quantity of about 5,000 units, the Chinese entrepreneur or factory will actually deliver these phones. If you compare this now to the innovation cycle in BlackBerry or Nokia, it's about 1.5 years from the drawing board to the final finished product. And part of that problem is the royalty requirements on the wide variety of patents that exist on the phone. On a phone which is not as complex as the Spice Popcorn, just a BlackBerry, current estimates by researchers are that there are about 25,000 patents on this phone. So you can imagine that the Spice Popcorn M9000 most probably has 35,000 patents very easily. It might be easy to get an injunction against the Samsung devices in the European and American markets because often these patents are registered under that jurisdiction. But with the Spice Popcorn it might be impossible because in India most probably those patents are not registered. And Indian courts are less likely to grant injunctions like German or American courts. So the policy options that countries have are patent pools and royalty caps. If you look at just GSM as a standard, so we can look at a phone and there are several layers of technology, and one layer is the networking layer. If one looks at the GSM standard, about 900 patents have been granted in the big patent offices in Europe, in America, in the Japanese patent office, and 600 patent applications are waiting for approval. But what makes it easy for a manufacturer of a phone to comply to those patents is those patents, at least the bulk of the important ones, are organized in pools. So it's easy for a manufacturer to be in compliance. All they have to do is license from the pool. So what hopefully research from my center will demonstrate is that we need much more pooling across all the layers of the phone. The m-commerce layer, the operating system, the device layer, etc. And also a policy option exercised in India till very recently, lifted only 2 years ago, is the idea of royalty caps. The Reserve Bank of India used to mandate a 5% royalty cap. That means if the manufacturing cost of, or if the selling cost of a device was $100, then only $5 could go towards IP. While from a liberalization perspective, the lifting of the royalty cap might have been a good idea, perhaps when it comes to developmental impact, the Reserve Bank of India might want to reintroduce that cap specifically for sub-$100 or sub-$200 devices. So there are a range of policy options that are emerging, pushing exceptions and limitations, the idea of flat rates and copyright levies, and patent pools, and royalty caps. And increasingly policymakers in countries must exercise these options, otherwise they leave their people behind. For example, Finland, which is clearly not a developing country, has already a copyright levy system in place for photocopying of books. So when you go to Finland and photocopy a book, that's not a criminal offense, because part of the price you pay for the photocopy goes to the collecting society. So that's a legitimate activity. In India, of course, you go to prison for 6 months. It's not enforced, but that is the law in theory. Since I'm in an economics conference, I thought I'd also try and give an economic framing to this topic. You must think of intellectual property and the rents we pay as rent on intangible property, very similar to the rent we pay on tangible property and very similar to the rent we pay on capital. If you look at the world of tangible property and capital, it's very finely configured. If I want to rent a home or a house in New Delhi, I pay I pay only 2 months rent as safety deposit. If I want to rent a home in Bangalore, I pay 11 months rent as a security deposit. In India, on my credit card, I pay 44% interest, compounding interest rate, annual compounding interest rate. If you were to look at your own credit card bills, you will realize that you pay a very different interest rate. Part of it is explained by inflation. The other part is explained by the demand and supply of capital. The regime of intellectual property is very strangely configured, almost immune to research and evidence, almost purely informed by rhetoric. We have a global crisis, and we have correction in the tangible property markets, and we have correction in the financial markets. But there's almost no correction in the intangible property markets. So I would hope that in the future we can work much more closely with economists and ensure that the intellectual property regime is informed with evidence. Thank you so much.
Hi. Sorry, I don't have a presentation. I'm Marina. I work at Google Russia, and I'm in charge of public affairs in Russia. I wanted to focus on copyright as well, on a very peculiar situation that we have with copyright online in Russia. But let me first say a few words about Russian internet as such, as I think some of you may not be that familiar with the issue. So why Russian internet is different from the situation in the global internet. I would say that we have lots of initiatives which are aimed at oppressing internet freedoms, but few of them have passed so far, fortunately, and some of them that have passed are not exactly being implemented or don't exactly have mechanisms to be implemented. We don't have many foreign brands on Russian internet, as you may know. We don't have Amazon, we don't have eBay. Facebook doesn't have a representative office here, just one person. But instead we have very many powerful local brands, such as Yandex and Mail.ru. And those two brands are considered among the most powerful in Europe due to the recent IPOs that both companies went on. And one paradox, which I find very interesting on Russian internet, is that Russian internet has until very recently been marginalized. It's in a perception of local officials, of more or less local public. It's been at the plot of several companies, several blogs, several businesses which have been more or less concentrated on their own. And recently, Russian web has started to sort of spill out and conquer other spheres, previously unusual for it. For instance, the notion of internet economy has very recently been introduced to the officials, and they have recently discovered this as a novelty for themselves. And Google has conducted a research together with Boston Consulting Group to assess the volume of internet economy, which is a relatively new sort of notion. And we realized that Russian internet economy in 2009 accounted for 1.6% of the GDP, which is and 2.1% of the GDP if excluding oil economy and factors which are linked to the oil economy. And basically this is more or less close to Italy or Spain. So it's a very interesting figure. But let me speak of another very powerful trend on the Russian internet, which is the copyright reform and the trend, basically the dimension where copyright reform is now taking. We, until very recently, talks with the local rights holders and the Western rights holders who are represented in Russia have mainly focused on the dilemma of whether internet is good or bad, whether internet should be shut down as such, or should be sort of kept alive. It's just changing as we speak, if I may. And rights holders are now realizing that internet is actually giving them an additional revenue instead of stealing their markets. And I'm mainly now talking of movie production companies and to a less extent of publishing houses. So what does internet give to rights holders globally and in Russia's situation, particular to the Russian environment? Authors, including professional content industry and users, can suddenly use internet to promote themselves. And they have much lower costs when they start promoting themselves online as compared to the offline situation. Think of YouTube, which didn't exist only 6 years ago. YouTube has now an audience of 600 million people worldwide, and we have more than 27 million unique viewers per month in Russia, and this number is growing very fast. And we now have 48 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute. It's more than, if you think of it comparatively, it's more than Hollywood production studios show over a year. So basically, it's quite a big figure. And the number of uploaded videos in Russia and from Russia have increased by 145% over the last year. We very much cherish the fact that a conventional user, a user like us, like you and I, can actually become as famous as as a conventional professional, let's say. And we have beautiful examples in the West, such as Justin Bieber. We have much fewer of them in Russia, but also quite impressive, such as Pedro. Or we have bloggers who have also proven that they can conquer and actually collect over 3 million views and subscribers, such as Marina, who is a very famous virtual teacher online and has an interesting blog on YouTube. Interestingly, increase in these figures and changing of the situation and the fact that we have much more of the UGC, user-generated content, on YouTube, for instance, than we have in terms of professional content, is directly linked to the success that monetization is currently making. The demonetization paradigm is currently making. By Jason and Partners Consulting figures, the revenue from the video advertising online in 2010 was reached $18 million, or 2.4% of the overall online advertising market. And they forecast this figure to be $36 million in 2011, by the results of 2011. And by 2016, this company predicts 12% of video online advertising from the volume of the overall online advertising, which would be $280 million. So rights holders, as well as conventional bloggers, conventional users, are quickly adapting to these logics of advertising online and actually earning on their content. And this is how it works on the example of YouTube. We currently have over 20,000 partners on YouTube worldwide. which are using our partner program, Content IT, and are monetizing their videos. And we have 70 partners in Russia, and just less than a year ago, we only had one. 65 or 67 out of these partners are monetizing their content. And these are Russian studios, Russian broadcasting and production studios such as Basilev and STV, which are actually quite a curious example. Basilev is owned by Berkman, who is also famous in Hollywood and is quite a distinguished film director in Russia. He used to be one of the most resistant and persistent opponents to internet as a paradigm until very recently. We have Mosfilm, the legendary Soviet film production studio, well, Soviet then Russian, which is one of the rare examples of uploading their full-length films online. And we don't have many of those examples worldwide. We do have them, but not many. And Mosfilm, well, negotiations have lasted for a couple of months. We have been persuading them. And now they are using a technology, which I'm going to say afterwards, the technology of protecting their content online. And they're free to actually show everything they have. And their users are very proud of that and are welcoming this experiment heartily. Another interesting trend is that all the musical labels, musical record studios that we have in our partner program in Russia, such as Nikitin Records, Matvienko Center, Gala Records, etc., they are monetizing copies of their videos and of their music. Copies which are found on other users' channels, which until recently we would call pirates, right? So they're monetizing those pirated copies, and it's proving, very popular, and it's proving to increase their revenues instead of increase their losses, as they would say probably a year ago. We think that this is changing. I don't have much time, so I'll wrap it up quickly. We have these very interesting trends and change of philosophy in the attitude towards pirate content. Apart from YouTube, obviously, we do have several, as we call them, new digital distribution models in Russia, such as Twigo, Zumbi. We don't have iTunes, we don't have Hulu, but we have local alternatives. And to wrap it up, we are currently lobbying for, as the internet industry, and rights holders are joining in, fortunately, we're lobbying for a local adapted version of DMCA, because we don't have it in Russian, we don't have legal protection for professional content online. And we think that by introducing DMCA-like principle, which would introduce intermediary liability exceptions, yet with responsibility coming upon notice, we would all contribute to advancing and fostering of these innovative platforms, and would actually help rights holders to adapt and change their business models and flourish together with the users. Thank you, and sorry for being that eloquent, probably excessively.
Thank you. We have some time. I'd like to open it up to any questions from the audience for any of the speakers. There were a couple of questions in the middle. Sure. If there's another microphone around.
Okay, I have two questions. One was, I think there was two parts actually in this roundtable. So the first one is about blogging and about these researches, because last year when we read Micro-Russian blogosphere, there was a question about blog, and now at present not just for IT specialists but for ordinary people. I mean that, as you know, blogosphere peaked 6 years ago, and after this we can see a clear decline. And I think it was last week, even in Russian radio, there was also a report on Live Journal saying that there is a big decrease in this sphere. So, and as you know, most of the users, they are going to the social net, and like Shenzhen social net in China and Kontakte social net for Russia, I think these users are, so we can use bots and, for example, Russian-speaking coders to work with this content. So I'm interested for the future prospect for such researchers, because you know it's a rather difficult question. And the second question about IPR and this protection, because there was many words and right words, but for example in Russia there was very popular this book Free Culture by Lessing. It was translated into Russian, and now we can read it freely on the internet. And it's a very important question about how to kill creativeness, and especially with this good example of China Telephone. As I remember, last autumn there was a big campaign by Chinese government to protect intellectual property. So about in a month after it started, there was official who reported like this, that yes, IP protection is very important for us, but it's also very important not to damage this innovative movement that we can see among our counterpart producers. So I would like to know some comments about this issue of intellectual property. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, why don't we collect maybe one or two other questions? If there are some others, we'll bring it back to the panel.
I have a quick question for the people from the Berkman Center. You talked about briefly the agenda on the impact of internet on politics. I was wondering if you can tell something more about the main lines that are being developed in that sense, and what exactly researchers at the center are currently working on.
Thank you. Here and then here.
I also had a question for the Berkman Center about data, and whether any of the blog mapping data and characterizations that you showed here, how and in what ways might they be available for research.
And last one up front.
A short question for the Google. Suppose I do a short documentary, 5-minute documentary that uses like 30-second footage from some, Hollywood, something like that. And then the studio asks you to take it down or whatever. Do you just take it down, or do you ever negotiate a fee maybe to protect the content? And then did you get into these kind of negotiations and protecting the content?
Okay, thank you. Who wants to start first? Berkman had the most.
Okay, so I'll Rob jump in whenever you want to. Okay, so the question of are fewer people blogging, and does that, as I understood, does that mean that blogs are not important in a sense? So generally it's the same thing that's been said in the US, that blogs are no longer popular and there are millions of people on them, and I would just say that I think it is a bad measure of the impact of any technology is how many people are using it. But I think it is generally true that with all of these technologies, they also become sort of media superstars. So right now it's Twitter and it's Facebook and it's Kontakte, and they're getting huge numbers of people joining, and then they're sort of leveling off. I will just say potentially that what may happen with live journal is what happened in the US with blogs, which is for a long time we had a huge increase, and then actually over the last few years there's been a pretty stable amount, which is about 10% of American internet users are actively blogging, which is relatively small compared to something like Facebook, but it is actually, when I think about it, it's 10% of the population is actually talking about, not always, but in many cases involved in an international or sort of a public conversation conversation that would be very hard to have before. So, but you also raised another question which is connected to another one on other platforms and how do we study other platforms. What we're doing right now is we're doing a project that's looking at Russia, and it's wrapping up right now, but we are trying to understand this space within the broader media ecology, and as well as on other platforms. So part of the reason we're doing the Twitter research is that now that we've done this type of methodology on blogs, we can apply it to Twitter and see how it's similar or different. I showed a couple of those explanations. Another thing we're doing is we're actually collecting data. We're doing really, as opposed to social network analysis, we're doing more content analysis on Russian TV, Russian government websites, again, the most 1,000 popular blogs in Russia, as well as some of the blog clusters that we showed here, and I'm forgetting everything I said. So and then we compare actually how different topics are discussed on different platforms, and then just a final point on things like social networks. They're a huge part of the space, but unfortunately for academics and researchers, it's very hard to, due to privacy concerns, to study those spaces. So I'll just leave it as an open challenge and something that I think we need to consider to think hard about, and how do we get not necessarily access to that data, but how do we understand how people are using these types of social networks and understand their impact.
Sure, I'll just pile on a little bit. So there's a few other things that we're working on. They're still in their infancy. So we're starting a project to look at the political changes in North Africa and the Middle East. We're going to be applying the techniques that we've learned in other places, so studying blogosphere and Twitter as well. We're also looking at doing more survey research to understand how individuals interact with different platforms and different networks in becoming politically involved. There's obviously it's a huge amount of research, and we'll take baby steps and see what we can do to learn more about that. I just want to reiterate what Bruce said about social networks, is that there's obviously a lot going on there, and we're just in a very poor position to be able to study that because of the constraints that we're under as a research institution. We need to pass all our research through review boards, and this is the big question mark for us. I'm afraid that we're probably going to be in a position where a lot of other people with less stringent research standards are going to be able to do better research in that space than we are because of where we exist, which is unfortunate for us, but others will do that work, I guess.
If I understood the question, it was to do with balancing the need for greater creativity with the need to protect the rights of rights holders. I would strongly recommend reading the Media Piracy Report by Joe Caraganis. There are two interesting pieces of research in that report, or associated with that report, linked to the blog. The first is research from Hungary by Bodo Valas, which talks about how pirate networks serve as better archives than state archives for Hungarian films. So that is very interesting research. And the second research from China, and I don't know the name of the researcher, but she demonstrates that the first phase of the fight between the pirates and the rights holders was purely on price point. Both of them were trying to provide the same movie for the cheapest price, but the second phase of the war is now on quality, and how the pirates in China now do much more in terms of serving the fans' interest than the actual rights holder. To give you a simple example, if you are a fan of Prince, for example, and you try to buy the whole discography of Prince, that's impossible to even produce as a legal product, because Prince worked with so many different music studios. The only place that will give you the complete discography of Prince is Pirate Bay. So the pirates are clearly serving up better quality than the rights holders. The last thing, a story about books from India, and this is about John Gardner people usually think that the James Bond novels are written by Ian Fleming, but it was a franchisee, and John Gardner produced as many James Bond novels as Ian Fleming. He also did many other novels and series. And in Indian law, there is an exception, or a statutory license. It states that if a translation is not produced in Indian languages within 5 or 10 years, then you can approach the copyright registrar and produce translations, and the government will decide what royalty you need to pay to the rights holder. So, Gujarati translator called Ashwini Bhatt, thanks to his publisher, translated 3 books in the John Gardner series, not the James Bond and other series. They were a big hit in Gujarat, and the public came back to Ashwini Bhatt and the publisher and said, "There's the 4th book in the series." But John Gardner had died and there was no 4th book. But Ashwini Bhatt said, "I've already translated 3 books, I know how to write the 4th book," and he wrote the 4th book. And it said, whatever the title was, a novel by John Gardner translated by Ashwini Bhatt. So, indeed, to protect creativity, one will have to rethink the contours of the current IP regime.
Answering to your specific question, this kind of DMCA, this notice and takedown regime works on YouTube. It's purely up to the rights holder. If the rights holder wants to take it down, he can take it down, or he or she, the company can take it down, sends us a notice, and chooses, for instance, to block a part of your video. A part of your video can be blocked, either sound, for instance, soundtrack. If it's claimed by a rights holder, it can be blocked. However, we notify you as a user who uploaded this video of this wish of the rights holder, the video to remain blocked. We block it immediately first, then we notify you, and you have a right to the counter notice. If you claim that this is either fair use or is a home video and you actually own the rights to it, we have other reasons to actually protest. You send us a counter notice, and then we tie you up with the rights holder who claimed the rights for this video, and we take further steps according, only upon the court notice afterwards. Meaning, we are acting as a mail service, basically directing and redirecting this correspondence between you and the rights holder who claimed the rights. This is a most sort of flat system which has been invented by the American law in the first place, and exists also in some different legal regimes as well, including Europe. We don't have it in Russia currently, although YouTube follows the American law in this regard, and we would take it down in all our products, regardless of the jurisdiction, regardless of where we are. And as for the question of whether we do negotiate or not, we are not a court instance here. We cannot judge whether it's rightful or not rightful for you to claim, that this video must be within the fair use regime. However, we do have a database of songs, for instance, that we buy off from the rights holders. It's legal and it's free to use on YouTube. I should probably stop here to the room.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, the economists are back in the room, and we do have to give them their conference back. So I wanted to thank all of you and thank the panel. I think we've heard a lot of things from a global perspective that are relevant, and this is very familiar with Russia. We've heard about having more questions than answers in terms of the imperatives. We've heard about having more rhetoric than evidence in terms of policy making. We've heard about having more criminal liability than civil adjudication in terms of law. And I think that that's a challenge to all of us here, whether we're in policy analysis or whether we're thinking about how to develop and apply models of behavior and economic interaction and policy impact. So as I said, this is the first public event in the Center for New Media and Society here in Moscow, but there's a lot more to talk about. I would, in thanking all of the panelists, also encourage you to find them later through the coffee breaks and in the hallways. That we do want this to be an open source and collaborative and creative endeavor moving forward. So thank you for your time.